Okay, Elden Ring has been out for almost a week now, and I had mentioned in a previous video that I did not believe the difficulty had been significantly altered, just based on the interviews, not even in gameplay. But after putting 25-hour plus, I don't know, something around that ballpark, I still believe that to be the case. In fact, I saw articles, like headlines saying that Margit and Godric were too hard. Like they're too hard, they need to be easier or whatever. And I'm like, wow, that's too hard. I'm like, oh, I don't know if you want to play more of this game. I don't know if you're up for it. But you could only convince me. The only way you'll get me to believe that the clear rate of this game will improve over the others is if this was the best-selling like Souls game ever of all time. That's the only way I'll believe that more people completed this. But I also mentioned in that video that Miyazaki had stated you can drop something and then go elsewhere and take on maybe an easier challenge in a different area. And in fact, with the open world nature, you can totally make that happen. You can go to those places and then die immediately. Because what I'm gonna predict is like more people, and just from I mean personal anecdotes, but from people I've spoken with, it could potentially be more frustrating than other Souls games, because you might go to one area, get frustrated, and then go like, okay, screw that area, I'm gonna go somewhere else, end up somewhere else, get killed immediately by some giant monster or whatever, and then you're like, where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? Like, I don't understand. So it might give you that idea. For me, it actually made me feel like I took on stuff that maybe I was a little bit too underleveled for. But just because I thought that's where I needed to go, I thought that was progress. I'm like, well, Souls is hard, right? So, but then just to find out there was a bunch of different things I could have done on the open world, like places I could have discovered to kind of grind up a bit, but I just didn't do it because I wasn't. I was thinking it has to be challenging, right?
Brandish the Elden Ring for all of us.
Hidetaka Miyazaki had given an interview with The New Yorker. He's the creator of the Soul series and director of Elden Ring, so of course it'd be very interesting to get his perspective on the series, and also I suppose his perspective on the audience's perspective of his game. And I'll link the article in the description. You can go check it out, the whole thing. But I'm just going to read specific points, specific paragraphs that I found interesting, which is mostly just his quotes. So starting off here, I've never been a very skilled player. I die a lot, so in my work, I want to answer the question, if death is to be more than a mark of failure, how do I give it meaning? How do I make death enjoyable? And I think he's always been about gamifying death, at least starting from Demon's Souls. Awful title. But, the fact that, like, you drop souls when you die, or the checkpoint system where, like, oh, I have to start all the way here again? Like, this is ridiculous. And, trying to, like, kind of psych out the player. I mean, like, for an example here, this is just a tease at the player. It doesn't necessarily, like, something saying on the screen you died is completely unnecessary. I know I died. I was there. So it's clearly teasing the player there. But then, it also gives the player some thought here. I'm like, I have to go through that whole stage again? Well, can I just skip stuff? Can I just run past all these enemies to get where I was last? Because especially if you've dropped a whole bunch of souls and you want to pick them up. So I think that's very taken to heart of what that series is about. And gamifying death in that sense. So he does mention here though, which is interesting, he's like, I do feel apologetic toward anyone who feels there's just too much to overcome in my games. I just want as many players as possible to experience the joy that comes from overcoming hardship. And I can totally dig that. I really like, so obviously, I bet if he was in the room with a player who just like doesn't care for Dark Souls, he's like, no, come on, give it a shot. You'll get into the groove of things, and that's the way I found a lot of people got into it. It wasn't like, I mean, some people were probably like, they played it the first day and then they loved it, but it took some warming up, warming up to, because hardship is not necessarily something we really want in our lives, but we do like the feeling of overcoming it, and that's what the whole series is about, right? I mean, he even mentions it here, obviously. And the article goes on to talk about his life. I think it did mention at some point that he grew up in a poor neighborhood. Like, he didn't start off great. And the only reason he took the certain jobs he did or certain career paths he did was to support his siblings. And, I think they were asking, did that have any influence? And he mentioned here, I wouldn't say that my life story, to put it in grandiose terms, has affected the way I make games. A more accurate way to look at it is problem solving. We all face problems in our daily lives. Finding answers is always a satisfying thing. But in life, there's not a lot that gives us those feelings readily. So I know he mentioned that, like, what happened in my life has no effect on me or how I make my games. But I just find it hard to believe that I don't know, maybe somebody else could have created Dark Souls coming from a completely different background and like childhood. But it's hard to believe that his childhood wouldn't have an effect on how he makes games or how he approaches games. In fact, I remember there being another article about how he couldn't understand the books he was reading. Yeah, he was poor, so he had to get books in English, and he didn't know, I don't even think he knew, I don't know how much English he actually knew, but he's reading through them, and I think one of them was even Lord of the Rings, and he can't understand anything from them. He's just picking up bips and bobs and making up his own story in his head. And if you tell me that didn't have an influence on the creation of the Soul series, I can't believe that would not have an impact on his version of storytelling. But to be fair, I think a huge part of the reason why Souls is the way it is influence from Eco. He quotes that as being one of the series that's really inspired him to get into game making. So more quotes. We are always looking to improve, but in our games specifically, hardship is what gives meaning to the experience. So it's not something we're willing to abandon at the moment. It's our identity. And, again, that's all about the Souls identity specifically. Because not every game needs to be super difficult. You can play Uncharted, for example, and you're getting like more of a theatrical experience. You're more in it for that. I mean, you can play for the difficulty if you want, if you can adjust the difficulty slider, of course. But, it doesn't need to be a part to appreciate the Uncharted experience. Whereas Elden Ring, I mean, that's what you're playing it for. And so the notion of like making it easier doesn't really make any sense. That's like saying, I don't want to play a Souls game. I want to play this bastardization of whatever. All right. When I'm playing these games, I think this is the way I'd want to die. In a way that is amusing or interesting or that creates a story I can share. Death and rebirth, trying and overcoming, we want that cycle to be enjoyable. In life, death is a horrible thing. In play, it can be something else. Which is great, because I mean, there's always that compilations of like, those Dark Souls players that got so close to beating the boss or like got killed by something completely crazy that you didn't see coming. So I think that's very funny right there that you would mention that. And I wonder how much of that was influenced after the fact. Like, was that really part of it from Demon's Souls? Or after Dark Souls became a huge thing and people were uploading, death compilations, did he just create more and more scenarios for people to die in stupendous ways? I'm wondering if the outside media influence affected certain decisions. I would imagine it would. So he mentions here working with George R.R. Martin, and that he only had worked on the backstory, which was interesting because I thought, like, when they first announced George R.R. Martin, I thought, like, Souls has never been a narrative-driven experience, so I don't know how this is going to work. But again, he only worked on the backstory, worked on text about settings, about the mythology and the like, and not the actual moment-to-moment character dialogue. In our games, the story must always serve the player experience. If Martin had written the game's story, I would have been worried that we might have to drift from that. I wanted him to be able to write freely and not to feel restrained by some obscure mechanic that might have to change in development. So yeah, just trying to. It's kind of odd. It's like they had to work around having George R. R. Martin write the script for them, and I'm wondering how much of that. I don't want to be like super cynical here, but like how much of this is just, at the time of the announcement when they announced Elden Ring and that George R. R. Martin was working on it, how much of it was just like the brand of having Game of Thrones and Souls. Oh my God, this is crazy. I'm wondering how much of that played into it in the fact that like he only worked on a very specific portion of it. And going more into story, he mentions that power of imagination is important to me. Offering room for user interpretation creates a sense of communication with the audience, and of course, communication between users in the community. This is something that I enjoy seeing unfold with our games, and that has continued to influence my works. So he definitely pays attention to what the community says about his projects. So I definitely feel like there's even gameplay mechanics influence the way. I remember at one point they said, "Oh, the FromSoft doesn't pay attention to anybody playing their games or anything like that." But I mean, if he's paying attention to the story, why not the gameplay, right? And then the article goes on to mention he's a very micromanaging boss, and that they've learned a lot from him. But like, of course, he's a very stressful person to be around. It sounds like. So he mentions here, the thing I prized is total openness from the staff. I try to be frank about my own mistakes because of my influence over these games. People are often reluctant to give their honest opinion, even when it may matter most. So I try to not let pride get involved. I try to create trust. So mentioning how he works with his staff. But yeah, very micromanagey is what I'm getting from there in the nicest terms possible. I enjoy the process of solving problems that I know can be fixed. Impossible challenges, that's where I draw the line and where I feel stressed out. So I'm extremely fortunate to be able to apply that process by creating games. And obviously, I mean, that's another influence over his games, how he feels about his work. And that he wouldn't, and it ends with a nice quote about his family. How he would never allow Dark Souls to be played in his household. So very interesting right there. And yeah, just a nice wholesome article. I would say go check it out. I really enjoyed thumbing through it. And I'm really glad to hear that he has no interest in kind of changing what he does. He knows what he wants in his games and he's confident in it. But of course he mentions that he also takes criticism. He wants to take criticism from his staff on how they can improve that specific experience, by mentioning hardship needs to be a part of it. You can't just rip that part out and then it's still the same thing anymore. So very interesting. So I'm gonna go back to playing Elden Ring.